Dr. Thomas W. O'Donnell, a respected American energy and geopolitics strategist, has long been known for his ability to connect global energy markets with political realities. From his lectures in Berlin and New York to his thoughtful blog globalbarrel.com, he has built a reputation for stripping away rhetoric and exposing the hard truths behind wars, pipelines, and power struggles. When the war in Ukraine erupted in 2022, O'Donnell became a frequent analyst across Western media, warning that Europe's reliance on Russian oil and gas would not just fund Moscow's war machine but also deepen fractures within NATO. In his latest blog post, he addressed the intensifying news: Ukrainian counteroffensives, Russia's shifting energy strategy toward China, and the U.S. push to secure LNG, liquefied natural gas, exports to Europe. He noted, "Energy security has become the second battlefield of this war. Whoever controls the pipelines controls the politics." He warned that even if the fighting slowed, the energy shock would last a decade. He stressed that Ukraine's survival is linked not only to military aid, but also to how Europe rewires its entire energy system. His words resonated across policy circles in Washington, Brussels, and Kiev. For many, O'Donnell was not just a commentator. He was a strategist pointing to the next moves in a war that was as much about oil and gas as it was about tanks and missiles. Late one evening in his Berlin office, O'Donnell received a coded email. Unlike the usual press requests, this one bore the seal of an unnamed European intelligence agency. The message was blunt. "Your analysis has predicted every Russian move with startling accuracy. We believe you know what comes next. Meet us in Brussels." He hesitated. For years, he had prided himself on being an independent scholar, advising governments, yes, but never becoming entangled in cloak and dagger affairs. Yet something about this felt different. At the Brussels meeting, O'Donnell was shown intercepted Russian communications. They suggested Moscow was preparing to use energy sabotage on a scale far greater than the Nord Stream pipeline explosion. Entire swaths of Europe could be plunged into darkness in winter. "Dr. O'Donnell," the intelligence officer said, sliding the documents across the table, "we need more than your analysis. We need your foresight. What will Putin's next move be?" O'Donnell leaned back, his mind racing. He had spent decades studying oil markets, Kremlin strategies, and the geopolitics of scarcity. Now, his theories were no longer confined to academic papers. They might decide the fate of millions. But he also knew the truth. Predicting Putin was one thing, outmaneuvering him was another. And if his forecasts were this accurate, it meant someone in Moscow might already be watching him too. The Brussels conference room was windowless, lit by the sterile glow of fluorescent panels. Dr. Thomas W. O'Donnell adjusted his glasses, scanning the documents before him. Schematics of pipelines, notes on cyber attacks, and fragments of Russian military chatter sprawled across the table. The intelligence officer spoke again, lowering his voice. "Dr. O'Donnell, we know you've written that Russia views energy as a weapon, not just an export. What if we told you their next strike will not be on the battlefield, but on Europe's grid itself?" O'Donnell leaned forward. "Are you saying Moscow intends to launch cyber attacks on power systems?" The officer nodded. "And not just cyber. Sabotage. Physical strikes. They are watching how the West scrambles every time there is a blackout. Every time gas storage runs thin. Imagine this winter, Berlin, Warsaw, Milan, plunged into darkness for weeks. What would NATO do? How would Ukraine fight then?" The strategist tapped the edge of his notebook. His mind mapped out the connections. Pipelines, LNG terminals, naval choke points. It was all there, a fragile web of energy arteries. "They'll hit the arteries," O'Donnell muttered. "Not to kill outright, but to choke, to bleed slowly. The real war is already in the pipelines." The officer studied him. "Then you see why we need you. You've predicted every major move since the first day of the invasion. Tell us, what will happen next?" O'Donnell hesitated. He was a scholar, not a spy. But as he looked at the classified files, he realized something. His blog, globalbarrel.com, had become more than analysis. It was a blueprint, a mirror reflecting strategies that intelligence agencies had only begun to uncover. And if the Russians knew that, he might already be a target. Back in Washington, real-world policymakers were indeed struggling with the same dilemmas O'Donnell had been writing about. The White House had rushed LNG exports to Europe. Germany raced to open floating terminals. Analysts on Wall Street debated whether Russia's pivot to China could truly replace the European market. On globalbarrel.com, O'Donnell's latest post gained traction. Europe must act as if every cubic meter of gas is a weapon. Sanctions will not break Russia quickly, but resilience, new infrastructure, regional cooperation, and decoupling from fossil fuel blackmail can. It was the kind of sober, cutting analysis that policymakers both feared and relied upon. Far away, in a secure Moscow compound, a group of Kremlin advisors huddled around a large screen. On it was O'Donnell's blog, translated into Russian. His words were underlined in red. "He knows too much," one advisor hissed. "He is shaping Western perception. If governments listen to him, they will harden faster than we can adapt." Another voice, colder, more commanding, "Then silence him. Scholars who turn prophets are dangerous. The Americans trust his foresight. Remove him from the game." The room fell silent. A decision had been made. It was past midnight in Berlin when O'Donnell's laptop pinged. He almost ignored it, assuming it was another academic journal request. But the subject line froze him. "You are being watched. Stop writing." No sender, no trace, just the message. He closed the lid, heart pounding. For decades, he had lived in the world of ideas, seminars, think tanks, policy debates. But now the line between analyst and actor was blurring. If Moscow had indeed marked him, every word he wrote on globalbarrel.com could carry consequences far beyond clicks and citations. O'Donnell poured a whiskey and sat in the dark, staring at the city lights. Berlin had survived walls, wars, and occupations. Now it stood as the front line of Europe's energy war. He scribbled a note in his leather-bound journal. "Pipelines are not steel, they are veins. Cut them and nations bleed. Whoever controls the veins controls the body. Russia knows this. Does the West?" Meanwhile, reality echoed his fears. In late 2023, European officials had confirmed mysterious disruptions in gas infrastructure in the North Sea and the Baltic. Nothing on the scale of Nord Stream, but enough to cause panic. Insurance premiums for pipelines soared. NATO launched naval patrols to guard undersea cables and pipelines. Energy markets trembled. Oil futures rose. European households braced for another winter of high bills. O'Donnell's commentary was quoted in the Financial Times. "This is not just an energy crisis, it is a geopolitical restructuring of Europe. Even if the war ended tomorrow, the trust is gone. Russia will never again be a reliable supplier." When he returned to Brussels, the intelligence officer met him with urgency. "Dr. O'Donnell," the officer said, sliding over a new file, "Russian operatives have been spotted in Rotterdam, Antwerp, Hamburg. We believe they are probing LNG terminals." O'Donnell frowned. "Those terminals are Europe's lifeline. If even one is sabotaged, you'll have chaos. Germany, France, Poland, all will scramble for supplies. Russia doesn't need to cut everything, just enough to sow panic." The officer's expression hardened. "That is why we are forming a shadow task force. Economists, engineers, strategists, people who see the battlefield differently. We want you in it." O'Donnell hesitated. He thought of his students, his blog readers, the policymakers who quoted his analysis. Becoming part of a covert circle meant crossing a line. But he also knew, if the war for energy was being fought in silence, his voice on the outside might no longer be enough. He finally spoke. "Very well, but understand this. I'm not a spy. I deal in foresight, not operations." The officer smiled faintly. "Foresight is the sharpest weapon we have." In Moscow, a man known only as Colonel Sokolov received his orders. Former GRU, now operating in the shadows. His task was clear: neutralize O'Donnell before his ideas hardened Europe's resolve. He studied the American's picture, a bespectacled professor, not a soldier. But Sokolov knew better. Words could be more dangerous than weapons. He whispered to his aide, "Arrange the accident. Berlin, perhaps. Something subtle. Scholars vanish every day." The aide nodded. Plans were set in motion. The autumn air in Berlin carried a sharp chill as O'Donnell walked back from his lecture at Humboldt University. He had spoken to a packed hall of students about the shifting balance of global energy, tracing the invisible arteries that bound Russia, Europe, and China. The applause had been strong, but his thoughts were elsewhere. Halfway down Friedrichstrasse, he noticed a black sedan idling. It wasn't unusual, but as he crossed the street, the headlights blinked twice, then switched off. He slowed, pretending to check his phone. A man stepped from the vehicle, tall, lean, moving with purpose. A flash of instinct ran through O'Donnell. He ducked into a bookstore and disappeared into the rows of shelves. Through the glass, he saw the man scan the crowd, then lift his phone to his ear. The professor's hands shook as he picked up a random book. The title, Energy Wars, The Hidden Frontlines. Almost ironic. He left through the back exit and hurried into the night. At that very moment, Western intelligence agencies were on alert. Reports of Russian sabotage cells moving across Europe multiplied. The Rotterdam LNG terminal had been briefly shut after a suspicious fire. Cyber attacks rattled Poland's grid. None of it proved direct Kremlin involvement, but the timing was too convenient. We are seeing hybrid warfare. A blackout is not an accident, it's a weapon.